Welcome to Insured Investors, where we share practical real estate investing tips with an insurance twist. I'm your host, Brooke Beats. Let's get started. You may be surprised to learn that your definition of flood and your insurance company's definition may differ. And we get it. It's a confusing topic, especially for those not in the insurance industry. But understanding the differences between flood, water damage, and sewer backup may help determine what type of insurance you need for your property and may even save your business. So today, we brought Denise Lackman, sales advisor at National Real Estate Insurance Group. Her job is to educate investors on the differences in insurance coverage and assist them in determining the best solution for their business model. Denise found her way into the insurance industry at a military event when a local insurance agency mentioned they were hiring. She applied, got the job, and 10 days later passed her licensing exam, and the rest is history. Denise is the chapter secretary at the Kansas City CPCU Society and currently earning her CPCU designation. She served in the military for 8 years, has a major in music education, and can play the trumpet and French horn. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for your service.
Absolutely.
Okay, you have to tell me about the French horn.
So, I played trumpet from the get-go. I started in 5th grade and went to college for trumpet. And 3 years into my degree, my professor says, "You're not a trumpet player." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm here to do this for the rest of my life." And he goes, "I think you would be better off with French horn." And I'm like, "Okay, let's do it." And from that point forward, I picked it up and started playing it. So it's a lot harder.
Hobby.
Yes. So I'm one of those weird band geeks. Yeah, totally.
Okay, so flood, water, sewer drain backup, all of the good stuff.
All of the fun things.
This is a great topic.
Yeah.
I'm actually interested to get into it because we get a lot of questions and confusion around.
A lot of people do not understand the difference between the three at all.
Yes. So let's start with, what is flood?
So flood would be when water from natural sources, whether it be a river, a bank, a lake, whatever the case may be, they breach the banks, they jump the banks, and there are heavy rains as well. And when the ground becomes oversaturated with the water, and it causes it to seep into the foundation of a property. So it's all coming from outside water sources.
Okay. So a good way to think of it is external water.
External water, yes.
Okay. Do most property policies cover flood damage?
No. It is a separate coverage. It usually excludes from the policy itself. So if you're wanting specific flood coverage, you're going to have to get a separate flood policy.
Is this something that that an insurance agent would generally tell you?
Probably not. They're probably not going to say, "Hey, well, this doesn't include flood, and if you want it, then you got to add it." It's one of those things where if you don't really bring it up, they're going to say, "Hey, this is excluded." You always have to watch for your exclusions in your policies and notate that, "Oh, hey, this is excluded, and if I really want this coverage, then we're going to have to bring it up separately."
When should somebody consider buying flood insurance?
So, if it's a loan, a lot of times the lender's going to require it, depending on where the property is. If it's in a flood zone, you can go to the FEMA website and see what flood zones you're in, or to check the high-risk flood areas.
Okay. And I think we will put the FEMA website information in the podcast so people can go and check to see if they are in a flood zone.
That's great.
That's great information to have.
Yeah.
What are the different options when buying flood coverage?
So there is the NFIP flood program. That's like your federal government coverage. It is administered from the Federal Emergency Management Agency and sold through a network of other insurance companies, or you can also do it through them directly. But with NFIP, there is a 30-day waiting period for that. So unless you have a loan that requires it, because sometimes I think they believe they can waive that waiting period if the lender does require it.
Okay.
We, as an NREG, we have our own flood program as well. Actually, what's really nice about our program, there is no waiting period. So if you need that coverage now, we're going to get you that coverage now.
How much does this tricky little coverage cost?
It's not cheap. You're gonna probably annually pay about $700. That's a basic flood policy, and it really just depends on the flood zone, the type of house, where it's at. There's definitely several factors that kind of play into how much that coverage would be.
So it could range. Would it typically also depend on like geographically?
Yes, absolutely. Because if you're living in the middle of the United States, really you're not looking at really high flood zones. But down in Florida, where part of your property is pretty much in the water, there's a very good chance you're going to have a flood.
What is considered water damage, and why do people confuse that with flood?
So it's one of those things where, again, where the source is coming from. But when it's water, anybody say there is a leak in the basement and their toilet overflowed in the basement and now it's water damage. A lot of people said, oh, it flooded. Well, technically it's not flood damage. It is water damage where you have burst pipes or overflow of a bathtub or whatever the case may be. The flood damage is not considered a form of water damage. So, like I was saying, the water damage is sudden and accidental. So, suddenly a pipe bursts, or suddenly there's an overflow of the toilet. With the flood damage, it's usually happening over a period of time.
Okay. So, to simplify it, maybe it would be easy to say that flood is from an external source and water is from an internal source.
Yes.
Okay.
That's really the easiest way to differentiate it. Definitely.
So how would someone go about getting water damage coverage?
So water damage is a special endorsement that you can add like an ancillary product to your policy. If you are purchasing the policy itself, you want to look for special form coverage, which is the most comprehensive form of coverage that you can have. And like we talked about with flood, you have to make sure and see what's excluded in your policy, because many times water damage is excluded from a policy. So you have to make sure that you specifically ask, is this covered in my policy? How do I get coverage for the water damage?
Okay. And if anyone missed it, our episode from 2 weeks ago covers special and basic forms, and we talk about water coverage.
And the difference. Yeah, absolutely.
So something else that you mentioned outside of flood, outside of water, is sewer drain backup.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that and how I could get coverage for it.
So again, this is another ancillary product that you can add onto your policy. This is when water backs up or overflows from the sewers, the drains, or the sump pump. This could happen during bad storms, heavy rains. And again, I'm referring back to the flooded basement where people say flooded basement. It may or may not be considered flood. Again, it all depends on how the water enters the dwelling. So if it seeps in from the outside, that you're looking at the flood damage. With the internal sources, you are looking at either the water damage or the drain and sewer backup.
And is this a coverage that just comes with all of the policies? Is excluded? How do I get it?
Normally excluded. This is another policy endorsement that you can add onto your policy. With ours, NREG offers this coverage through our tenant protector plan. And with that, and that's the only way that you can get that with our policy. But oftentimes it is its own coverage. It has its own deductible. It has its own limits. But our tenant protector plan really is an all-around source of coverage for the water damage and sewer drain backup.
So let's recap real quick.
Okay.
How do all of these coverages differ?
So flood. Again, like we said, this is normally excluded from your policy. You want to make sure if you need this flood coverage that you ask for it. And the flood is, again, where the water is coming from external sources into the property itself. So when there's heavy rains or the ground is oversaturated.
Okay. Water.
Water damage is sudden and accidental. So it's not something that happens over time or is a long period of time. It is something when, say, a pipe bursts or a bathtub overflows. So that is from an internal source.
And sewer drain back up.
And this is when the water backs up and overflows from a sewer drain. So again, heavy rains are coming and they're just forcing the pipes to just kind of push the water back up into the property. So again, an internal source.
And almost always excluded.
Always excluded.
To buy back.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to play a little game.
I like games.
Regarding floods.
Okay.
Flooding, flood coverage, all of that.
All right.
Fact or fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So, to get flood insurance, you must live in a floodplain.
This is fiction. Anyone can purchase flood insurance. In fact, 40% of NFIP insurance claims happen outside of a high-risk flood zone area. So, yeah, you don't have to be in a flood zone. I mean, obviously you don't want to pay for something you don't need, but it's good to, look into. We'll give you guys the link where you can look in and see, is this property in a flood zone?
And from your example from earlier, heavy rains.
Yes.
Even that could cause
It could happen anywhere.
So,
I mean,
yes.
Look at today's world where we have floods happening all over the world.
Yep.
And in places you wouldn't think were happening.
Yes, so important coverage to have.
Absolutely.
Fact or fiction? Flood maps don't change.
Again, fiction. Floodplains and the maps, they evolve. They're constantly changing. Just because you weren't in one 20 years ago, there is a high chance you could be now. The maps are just always evolving. So, I mean, if you've checked, you could have bought the house 20 years ago, but I would recommend just going back and kind of looking over it again because nothing stays the same, for sure.
And again, anyone can just go to the FEMA website, type in their address, and it shows it.
Super easy
of the floodplain.
Yeah.
All right, fact or fiction? During a 30-year mortgage, you're 27 times more likely to experience a flood rather than a fire.
Fact. Floods are really the most common form and most expensive form of a natural disaster in the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a wild
It's craziness because most people would think it would be a fire. Definitely a flood.
Yep. Last one. Fact or fiction? Just 1 inch of water can cause $25,000 of damage to your property.
Such a fact. Yeah. Even the most small damage that you could possibly think could really rack up the cost. It can be a very expensive thing to fix. So I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to pay this extra money in flood, but when it came down to it and that it's happening, you'll be thankful that you did buy it, for sure. It's very expensive.
Yes. So, major takeaways. Flooding is expensive. It is usually excluded. You want to make sure that you check to see if you're in a floodplain.
Yeah, absolutely. Check it. I mean, really, it takes seconds. Just check into it. It's, one of those things that you don't want to have to pay for it, but you're going to be happy to have it when it happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as a homeowner or real estate investor, make sure you know the difference between flood, water, sewer drain backup.
Yeah, ask your agent. I mean, your agent should be there to educate you on what you don't know. I mean, if you have questions about it, just ask those questions because they should be there to help you through it.
Well, thank you for coming on today. This has been very informative.
Yeah, very fun.
Good.
Because flood's so expensive, or so just a fun thing to do.
We will continue to post new episodes every other Wednesday on NREG's YouTube channel, that's NREIG, and on Spotify at Insured Investors. You can also follow NREG on Facebook and LinkedIn. If you have topic ideas or questions, please leave them in the comments below. We'll see you soon.